My grandson looked at me like I was a ghost standing in his kitchen. That's not a figure of speech. He actually flinched. A 7-year-old boy flinched at the sight of his own grandfather. And in that half second before he found his voice, I understood exactly how successful the lie had been. Not partially successful. Not mostly successful. Completely. His mother had told him I didn't love him anymore, and he had believed her with his whole small body. And now here I was, real and standing and breathing, and his first instinct was fear. Let that sit with you for a moment. The way it sat with me in that doorway. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a union electrician in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the kind of work that puts calluses on your hands and teaches you that most problems have a wire somewhere that's either connected or it isn't. You trace the fault. You find the break. You fix it. That's how I've approached most things in my life, including, eventually, this one. I have one daughter, Melissa, and through her, two grandchildren, Sawyer, who is 11, and Ruby, who is 7. Melissa is 38. She married a man named Craig 9 years ago, and for a long time, I considered myself lucky in the way a father is lucky when his daughter marries someone decent. Craig coached Sawyer's Little League team. He fixed my truck once without being asked. He called me Pop at Thanksgiving, and I liked it. What I'm about to tell you is the hardest story I've ever told anyone, let alone a camera. It's about my grandchildren, and what was done to them without their knowledge or consent, and what I did the day I found out. And it ends in a way that Craig did not see coming, not because I'm a vengeful man. I want to be honest about that from the start, because you're going to hear some things today that might make you think otherwise. I am not vengeful. I am, however, a man who spent 3 decades reading blueprints, and I have never in my life ignored a warning sign once I saw it clearly. If you're new to this channel, hit subscribe, because I have a feeling you're going to want to see how this ends. Stay with me. Every part of this matters, even the parts that are hard to hear. The trouble started 14 months before that afternoon in the doorway, though I didn't know it at the time. Trouble like this rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as something smaller. It began, of all places, at my late wife's memorial dinner. Eleanor had passed the spring before, after 39 years of marriage, and the family gathered at my house that November to do what families do: eat too much, tell stories, pretend the empty chair at the head of the table wasn't the loudest thing in the room. Craig had brought up an inheritance matter. Eleanor had left a small piece of property in the Poconos to be split between Melissa and her brother, my son Derek, who lives in Ohio and couldn't make the trip. Craig, who works in commercial real estate, had opinions about how the property should be handled. Sell it fast, split the cash, avoid what he called sentimental delay. I disagreed. Eleanor had loved that cabin. She'd asked me, near the end, to make sure the grandchildren got to grow up going there the way Melissa and Derek had. I said so, plainly, at a table full of grieving relatives, in front of Craig's parents who had driven up from Allentown for the dinner. I want to be fair to myself here, because I've turned this moment over in my head more times than I can count. I wasn't cruel. I didn't raise my voice, but I was direct. And I was direct about a decision that Craig had already made in his mind, in front of his own parents, and I watched something close behind his eyes that I mistook, at the time, for simple disappointment. It was not simple disappointment. I understand that now. The apology, when I offered it 2 days later, came through Melissa. I told her I'd spoken out of turn, that I should have discussed the cabin with Craig privately before airing it at a dinner meant for grieving, not real estate. I asked her to pass that along. She told me Craig appreciated it. I believed her. I had no reason not to. Craig still came to Sawyer's games. He still texted me photos of Ruby's school art projects. Nothing on the surface changed at all. And that, I've come to understand, was the most dangerous part of what was happening. A wire doesn't always spark before it fails. Sometimes it just quietly stops carrying current, and you don't find out until the day the lights don't turn on. By January, the visits had thinned, not stopped thinned, the way a friendship thins before you notice it's actually ending. Our standing Sunday dinners, which had been a fixture since Sawyer was in diapers, became, we'll try to make the next one. I told myself Craig's job had gotten busier. Commercial real estate, I reasoned. Deadlines. Melissa, when I called, sounded tired. In a way I chalked up to 2 kids and a husband climbing a corporate ladder. I gave them room. That's a decision I've had to make peace with, because giving them room is exactly what allowed the next several months to happen the way they did. By March, the calls had gone from weekly to occasional. By May, occasional had become rare. I sent birthday cards. I sent a gift card for Sawyer's 11th birthday tucked inside a letter I rewrote 3 times because I wanted the tone exactly right, warm, not needy, present, not pressuring. I never got a thank you call, which was unusual for Ruby especially, who used to phone me the same day just to describe what she'd bought with any money I sent. I told myself, kids get busy. I told myself a lot of things that spring and summer, mostly because the alternative explanation was one I wasn't ready to sit with. By August, I hadn't seen my grandchildren in 11 weeks. I drove to their house in Clark's Summit on a Saturday afternoon with a bag of things, a model airplane kit for Sawyer, a set of watercolor pencils for Ruby, the specific brand of caramel popcorn Ruby had once told me was her favorite food in the entire world, Grandpa. The entire world. The driveway had both cars in it. The lights were on inside. I knocked. Nobody answered. I called Craig's cell from the porch, close enough that if anyone was near the front windows, they would have heard it ringing. It went to voicemail. I stood on that porch for 11 minutes, the length of time it takes a man to fully understand that the people inside a house know exactly who is standing on the other side of the door and have decided, together, not to open it. I want to tell you what that does to a person. Not the anger came later, and I'll get to that. What it does first is something quieter and worse. It makes you doubt your own memory of your relationship with your own grandchildren. Did I do something? Was there a version of events where I deserved this silence? I drove home that night and sat in my kitchen, at the table where Eleanor and I had eaten 10,000 meals, and I genuinely could not construct a story where I had earned what was happening. I still didn't know how right I was to trust that instinct, and I also didn't know how much worse the truth actually was. The break came through my next-door neighbor, a woman named Conchetta Ruiz, who has lived beside me for 16 years and who, God bless her, still walks her dog past the elementary school every morning because it adds a nice loop to her route. Conchetta had run into Ruby at the school's fall carnival in October, a Saturday event, open to the public, the kind of thing half the town shows up for. She'd recognized her immediately. She'd known Ruby since Ruby was in a stroller. She crouched down, said hello, told her she hadn't seen her grandpa Walter in a while and hoped he was doing okay. Ruby, Conchetta told me, got very quiet. And then she said, in the flat, matter-of-fact voice that children use when they are repeating something they've been told and have no reason to question, Grandpa doesn't want to see us anymore. Mom said he doesn't love us like he used to after Grandma died. He's too sad about Grandma to be around us. Conchetta called me that same night. I remember exactly where I was standing in my kitchen when my phone rang beside the stove, my hand resting on the same counter where Eleanor used to roll out pie dough every Thanksgiving. Conchetta's voice was careful, the voice of a person delivering news she knows is going to detonate something. She repeated what Ruby had said, word for word, twice, because she wanted to be sure I'd heard her correctly the first time. I sat down at my kitchen table. I did not cry. Not then. I sat very still for what my phone later told me was 26 minutes, staring at a spot on the wall above the sink where Eleanor used to hang a calendar, running the timeline backward in my head. The thinning visits, the unanswered door, the silence, and watching it resolve, piece by piece, into something with a shape, not confusion anymore, a pattern. And once you can see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. The next morning, I called my attorney. Her name is Vanessa Okafor, and I'd used her firm 11 years earlier for Eleanor's estate planning, back before either of us imagined we'd ever need her for something like this. Vanessa listened to the whole thing without interrupting once, which I've since learned is a skill good attorneys have and bad ones don't. When I finished, she said something I've thought about every day since. She said, Walter, what you're describing isn't a family disagreement anymore. What you're describing is a fabricated narrative being delivered to minor children to sever a legal relationship. That has a name, and it has consequences, and we are going to document every single piece of it before we do anything else. Document. That word became the center of the next 4 months of my life. Vanessa told me not to confront Melissa. Not yet. She told me that the instinct to call my daughter and demand an explanation was exactly the instinct that would cost me the case if it ever came to one, because it would give Craig and Melissa the chance to construct a counter-narrative before I had proof of the real one. So instead, I built a folder. I want to tell you what was in it, because I think it matters, and because, if you are living any version of this story yourself, this is the part I most need you to hear. Every unanswered call, logged with date and time. Every unreturned text, screenshotted. The birthday card and gift card. with the receipt from the post office showing it had been delivered and signed for. A written, dated account of the porch visit in August, including the exact number of minutes I stood there, which I'd noted on my phone that same night while it was fresh. A signed, notarized statement from Conchetta describing exactly what Ruby had told her, in Ruby's own words, at the carnival. Every card I'd sent going back to Eleanor's death, photographs of Ruby's kitchen cabinet at my house. I want to explain that cabinet to you, because it comes back later in this story and I need you to understand what it meant. When Eleanor got sick, back when Ruby was 4, I started keeping a low cabinet in my kitchen stocked exclusively for the grandchildren, not for special occasions. For whenever. The specific fruit snacks Ruby liked and no other brand would do. The graham crackers Sawyer went through by the box, a tin of colored pencils, replaced whenever the tips wore down. Eleanor used to call it the Grandkids pantry and restock it herself every time she went to the grocery store, right up until she was too sick to shop anymore, and then I took it over, and I never stopped. Not during her illness. Not after she died. Not during the 11 weeks I hadn't seen them. I kept restocking a cabinet for grandchildren who, as far as they knew, had a grandfather who no longer loved them enough to see them. I gave Vanessa 4 months to build the case properly. 4 months where I did not call Melissa demanding answers. 4 months where I sent one more birthday card for Sawyer's 12th, dated and documented like all the rest. 4 months where I sat in my house most evenings looking at that low kitchen cabinet, wondering if Ruby still remembered it existed, wondering what a 7-year-old's memory does with a grandfather she's been told stopped loving her. In late November, Vanessa filed a petition in Lackawanna County for a formal grandparent visitation order, supported by the documentation folder, the notarized statement from Conchetta, and this was Vanessa's idea. And I want to credit her for it, because I would never have thought of it myself. A request that the court address, specifically, and by name, the false statement that had been made to the children regarding my relationship with them. Not just, grandfather wants visitation, and the record needs to reflect that the reason he'd been absent was a lie told to 2 minor children, not a lack of love. Craig's attorney called Vanessa within 5 days of receiving the petition. Vanessa told me later that his tone on that call was the tone of an attorney who has read the entire folder and understood exactly what was in it, not the tone of a man preparing to fight a losing case in court, but the tone of a man preparing to explain to his client why that fight would be a very bad idea. He proposed mediation. We agreed. I want to pause the story here, because I know some of you watching are wondering the same thing people wonder every time I tell a piece of this. What about Melissa? What was my daughter doing during all of this? I've asked myself that question more than any other, and I don't have a clean answer, because I don't think there is one. I don't believe Melissa sat down and decided to tell her children I'd stopped loving them. I believe, and I say this as someone who has known her for 38 years, that Craig constructed the story, and that Melissa either didn't fully know what was being said to Ruby and Sawyer, or knew, and told herself it was a small, temporary thing, the kind of untruth a marriage sometimes produces when one spouse is angrier at a father-in-law than the situation actually calls for. I'm not going to pretend I know which. What I do know is that a mother's silence, even a silence built on not knowing, still lands on a child exactly the same way. The explanation might matter to a courtroom. It didn't change what Ruby believed at that school carnival. Mediation took 2 sessions. The first was tense in the particular way. These things always are 2 attorneys, managing the emotional temperature of a room where nobody is ready to move. The second session was where the real work happened. By the end of it, we had a signed, notarized agreement. Alternating weekends, 2 full weeks each summer, with dates set by March of each year. Holidays on a rotating schedule through 2032, and this was the provision Vanessa had insisted on, written in language simple enough that an 11-year-old could understand it if it were ever read aloud to him, a clause stating that neither parent nor any other adult in either household would make any statement to the children regarding my health, my feelings toward them, or my relationship with the family that was not true. Any violation would be grounds for immediate modification. The agreement was signed on a Tuesday. Vanessa called Craig's attorney to arrange the first visit for that Saturday. But I didn't wait for Saturday. I want to tell you exactly what I did, because it's the moment everything in this story turns, and it's the moment I've replayed more than any other. The agreement gave me the right, effective immediately upon signing, to be listed as an authorized pickup contact at both children's schools. Vanessa faxed the court order to the district office that same afternoon. Wednesday morning, I put on a collared shirt. The good one Eleanor always said made me look like I had somewhere important to be, and I drove to Robert Morris Elementary. The woman at the front desk was kind and efficient in the particular way of someone who has worked a school office long enough to have seen every kind of family walk through that door. She checked her screen, confirmed I was listed as an authorized contact as of that morning, and asked if I needed a note for their return. I told her they'd be back by the next school day. She called down to the classrooms. I stood at the counter and looked at the corkboard beside the office window while I waited a flyer for the winter book fair, a lost and found mitten pinned up with a note, the ordinary visual texture of an elementary school on an ordinary Wednesday. Ruby came first. She walked through the office door with her backpack still on, looking at the floor the way a 7-year-old does when she's been pulled from class and isn't sure why. Then she looked up and saw me, and she stopped completely. Not for long. For that fraction of a second where a person's understanding of the world has to catch up to what's standing in front of them. Her grandfather, in the office of her elementary school, when her grandfather was supposed to have stopped loving her. Then she ran. She didn't say anything at first. Children who feel something enormous and true often don't. They just move toward it and hold on. And she put her arms around my waist and I put my hand on the back of her head, the way I used to when she was small enough to carry. And we stood there in the front office of Robert Morris Elementary on a Wednesday morning, and neither of us said a single word. And the woman at the desk looked down at her computer screen with the particular tact of someone who understands that certain moments don't need an audience. Sawyer came 4 minutes later, and he came differently. 11-year-old boys don't run across school offices, not even when they want to. He walked, slower than Ruby had, the way a kid walks when he wants to be completely sure of something before he lets himself believe it. When he reached me, he didn't hug me right away. He just looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, quietly, "Conchetta told Mom you never stopped loving us." Is that true? I told him it was the truest thing I'd ever said to him. He hugged me then, hard, the way boys that age hug when they've decided it's allowed. I signed them out. I thanked the woman at the desk. We walked to my truck. There's a diner 2 blocks from that school. Red vinyl booths, a laminated menu that hasn't changed in 20 years, the specific smell of coffee that's been on the burner since 6 in the morning. We took a booth in the back. Ruby ordered grilled cheese, because Ruby has ordered grilled cheese at every diner in a 50-mile radius since she was old enough to talk. Sawyer ordered a burger and told me, very seriously, that he was old enough now for the adult-sized one, and I did not argue with him about it. 10. I ordered coffee I never drank, because I wasn't thinking about coffee. We talked about school, about Sawyer's basketball season, which had started 2 weeks earlier, and whether his team had a shot this year. About a book Ruby was reading, something about a girl who could talk to dogs, and whether I thought that would be a useful power to have. I told her it would depend entirely on what the dogs wanted to talk about, and she considered this with total seriousness before agreeing that I had a point. I didn't ask about their mother. I didn't ask what exactly they'd been told, or when, or how many times. I didn't put 2 children in the position of choosing between loyalty to the household raising them and comfort with the grandfather they'd just been told the truth about. That wasn't theirs to carry. It was mine. When the ice cream came, Sawyer asked, and there was no version of that afternoon where I said no. Ruby looked at hers for a moment, then looked up at me with the directness 7-year-olds have that most adults spend a lifetime trying to get back. She asked if I'd missed them. I told her every single day, twice a day, sometimes more. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her ice cream like the matter was now permanently settled, which, as far as she was concerned, it was. Melissa called at 1:40 that afternoon. Sawyer saw his mother's name on my phone and looked at me with the specific expression of a child caught between 2 people he loves, unsure which way to turn. I told him everything was fine, that I'd step outside to take it. He nodded. Ruby didn't look up from her drawing. I walked to the small hallway by the restrooms, where it was quiet enough to hear and far enough that the kids wouldn't. Vanessa had been on a live call from my truck's dashboard that whole morning, listening, exactly as we'd planned. I answered and put the phone on speaker. Melissa's voice came through sharp with panic before I'd said a word. Where were the kids? Why hadn't the school called her first? What was I thinking, showing up like this without warning? I told her, calmly, that I had a court order and every legal right to pick up my grandchildren from school as of 9 o'clock that morning, and that I was sitting in a diner with them right now, eating lunch, and that they were safe and happy and would be home by 6 as agreed. Then I told her that Vanessa Okafor, my attorney, was on the line and had been for the last hour. There was a silence on the other end that told me everything I needed to know about what Craig had, or hadn't, told her about the mediation, about the agreement, about any of it. Vanessa spoke next, calm and precise, the way she always is. She confirmed the court order. She confirmed the visitation schedule. And then she said the thing I'd asked her, weeks earlier, to say exactly this way, if this moment ever came. She said that the agreement included a specific finding regarding statements made to the children about their grandfather's feelings toward them, and that any further such statements, from Melissa or from Craig, would be treated by the court as a direct violation with immediate consequences. Melissa didn't say much after that. She asked, quietly, if she could talk to Ruby. I walked back to the booth and handed Ruby the phone. I heard my daughter's voice crack on the other end saying her daughter's name, and Ruby said, "Mom, guess what? Grandpa's cabinet still has my fruit snacks." And I had to look out the diner window for a minute so the kids wouldn't see my face. I brought them home that evening, right at 6, exactly as the order required. Craig's car wasn't in the driveway. Melissa met us at the door, and she looked at me for a long moment before she said anything. And what she said was, "I didn't know it had gone this far." I believe that's true, and I also believe it doesn't undo 14 months of a 7-year-old thinking her grandfather stopped loving her. Both things live in the same house now. I've made my peace with that being complicated. The first official weekend under the new agreement, Sawyer and Ruby came to my place at 9 in the morning, exactly as scheduled. Sawyer went straight to the garage, where I still keep Eleanor's old bicycle, and started asking questions about the gears. Ruby went to the kitchen. She opened the low cabinet without a word, and stood there looking into it for a long moment. The fruit snacks, the graham crackers, the tin of pencils, everything exactly where it had always been, restocked every single week for 14 months. Even the 11 weeks when I didn't know if anyone was ever coming back to open that cabinet again. She looked up at me and said, "You kept filling it." I told her I had, and I told her I always would, for as long as there was a Ruby who liked fruit snacks in this world. She nodded the nod of a 7-year-old, confirming something she'd always secretly believed was true about the world, no matter what she'd been told, and she took the fruit snacks and went to go find her brother. Before I close this out, I want to say something directly to whoever's watching this and recognizing pieces of their own life in it. If you're a grandparent who's been cut off, quietly or suddenly, I need you to hear this clearly. Your relationship with those children does not belong to the parents who are managing their household. It belongs to you and it belongs to them, built over years, one cabinet, one bike lesson, one Saturday morning at a time, and no adult argument, however justified either side believes it is, has the right to erase that from a child's understanding of who loves them. There are legal structures built specifically to protect this. Get the attorney. Start the folder today, not after things get worse. Document every unanswered call, every unopened door, every card you sent that never got a reply. That folder is the difference between a grandparent who's been wronged and a grandparent who can prove it in a courtroom that doesn't know your family and won't take your word alone. And understand this, because I needed someone to tell me this 14 months ago, and nobody did. If someone tells your grandchildren that you stopped loving them, the truth doesn't stay buried. It comes back. It comes back in the shape of a boy walking slower than he wants to, checking if it's real before he lets himself believe it. It comes back in the shape of a small hand reaching for a cabinet that never stopped being filled. You are not gone. You were never gone. You were only kept from the door. And the day you decide to stop waiting on the other side of it is the day that ends. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and tell me in the comments about a grandparent in your life who never once stopped showing up. Those are the people worth saying out loud. I'll see you in the next one.